I found out my masculinity was toxic at a family barbecue on a Saturday afternoon in May, surrounded by people I loved, while holding a plate of ribs I'd spent 3 hours smoking to perfection. Let me back up, because the irony of that moment still hits me like a freight train every time I think about it. My name is Mark, and for 32 years I thought I was doing everything right as a husband. I changed the oil in both our cars without being asked. I fixed the garbage disposal at 2 in the morning when it started making that go-doffel grinding noise. I carried every single heavy grocery bag from the car to the kitchen because Emily had a bad back from a car accident years ago, and I worked 50-hour weeks as a project manager so she could pursue her passion for graphic design without the pressure of being the primary breadwinner. My dad, Robert, raised me to believe that being a man meant showing up, providing, protecting, and never complaining about it. My mom, Linda, taught me that actions speak louder than words, and that real love is demonstrated through sacrifice. I genuinely believed Emily appreciated all of this because she married me. She smiled when I fixed things, she thanked me when I handled the finances, and she never once complained about my approach to our marriage. That Saturday started like any other weekend at my parents' house. My dad was manning the grill with that focused intensity he brings to everything. My mom was setting out her famous potato salad, and Emily's sister Sarah had driven down from Portland with her new boyfriend, who seemed nice enough, but kept checking his phone every 5 minutes. The backyard smelled like charcoal and barbecue sauce, the kind of smell that makes you feel safe and nostalgic at the same time. Emily seemed relaxed, laughing at something Sarah said, sipping her wine in the late afternoon sun. I remember thinking how beautiful she looked in that yellow sundress and feeling genuinely grateful for the life we'd built together. Then dinner started, and about 20 minutes in, right after my dad told his story about the time he accidentally locked himself in the shed, Emily suddenly stood up. She tapped her wine glass with her fork like people do at weddings when they want the couple to kiss, and everyone went quiet. I thought maybe she was going to announce something exciting. Maybe she was pregnant, or maybe she'd landed a big client for her design work. Instead, she cleared her throat and said she wanted to share something important with everyone who mattered most to her. My stomach dropped before she even started talking because her tone had this rehearsed quality to it, like she'd been practicing in front of a mirror. She said, "I've been doing a lot of reading lately about relationship dynamics and gender roles, and I've come to realize something really important about our marriage." The exclamation point in her voice should have been my first warning. She continued by saying that she'd been reflecting on how traditional masculinity shows up in our relationship and how much of what we consider normal is actually rooted in patriarchal structures that limit both of us. I watched my dad's face go completely blank, that expression he gets when he's trying to process something that doesn't compute. My mom stopped chewing mid-bite. Sarah's boyfriend suddenly became very interested in his coleslaw. Emily kept going and said, "Mark embodies a lot of toxic masculine traits, and I think it's time we acknowledge that so he can evolve into a more emotionally available and progressive partner." The word toxic hung in the air like smoke. She listed examples. I always insisted on driving on long trips, which she said denied her agency. I handled all our finances, which she claimed infantilized her. I fixed things around the house without asking if she wanted to learn, which apparently robbed her of growth opportunities, and I made decisions about home security and maintenance without consulting her, which she labeled as controlling behavior. Every single thing I thought made me a good husband was being reframed as evidence of my problematic nature. I could hear my mom's sharp intake of breath and my dad's fork scraping against his plate in the silence. Sarah looked mortified, staring down at the table like she wished she could disappear. Part of me wanted to defend myself, to point out that Emily had never once complained about any of these things, that she'd actively encouraged me to handle the finances because she hated dealing with budgets, that she'd thanked me just last week for fixing the leaky faucet she'd been complaining about for days. But something stopped me, and in that moment I had what you might call a clarity of vision. I realized that arguing would be pointless because Emily hadn't come to this conclusion through logic or observation. She'd absorbed it from somewhere else, probably her online communities or her new therapist or those podcasts she'd been binge listening to during her morning walks. No amount of rational discussion was going to change her mind because this wasn't really about me. It was about her need to be seen as progressive and enlightened. So instead of defending myself, instead of getting angry or hurt or walking away, I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I set down my fork very carefully, looked directly at Emily, and smiled. Not a fake smile or a bitter smile, but a genuine smile that probably looked unsettling given the circumstances. I said, "You know what? You're absolutely right." My voice was calm, almost cheerful, and I could see confusion flash across Emily's face because this clearly wasn't the reaction she'd expected. I told her that I'd been operating under outdated assumptions about what marriage should look like and that I appreciated her brave honesty in calling me out. I said I was committed to evolving into the kind of partner she deserved, someone who rejected traditional masculine roles and embraced true equality in every aspect of our relationship. My dad made a noise that might have been a cough or might have been a strangled protest. My mom reached over and grabbed his hand like she was physically stopping him from saying something. Emily's expression shifted from surprise to pleased, like she'd just won an argument she didn't know she was having. She sat back down and squeezed my hand across the table, told me she was proud of me for being so receptive, and said this was the beginning of a better chapter for us. Sarah looked relieved that the awkward moment had passed. The rest of dinner continued with forced normalcy, but I barely tasted my food. Inside my head a plan was forming, cold and clear as ice water. If Emily wanted me to stop being traditionally masculine, if she wanted true equality without any of those protective instincts or provider behaviors she'd just labeled as toxic, then that's exactly what she was going to get. Not halfway, not partially, but completely and absolutely. I was going to give her the evolved man she demanded, and I was going to do it so thoroughly, so precisely, that she'd understand exactly what she'd just asked for. On the drive home, Emily talked excitedly about how this was a breakthrough moment for our marriage and how she'd been worried I'd react defensively. I kept my eyes on the road and made agreeable noises while mentally cataloging every single thing I did in our daily life that she'd just categorized as problematic. It was a longer list than I'd realized. When we got home, I told her that starting tomorrow, I was implementing immediate changes to ensure I respected her full autonomy and agency. She kissed my cheek and said she loved me, completely missing the edge in my voice. That night while she slept, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the garbage disposal I'd fixed, the tire I'd changed in the rain last month, the spiders I'd removed from the bathroom, the bills I'd organized, the security system I'd installed, the gutters I'd cleaned, the flat tire I'd changed on her car last winter at midnight. Every single act of service that I thought demonstrated love was apparently just evidence of my toxic need to control and protect. Fine, I thought. Let's see how long love survives without any of that foundation. She didn't know it yet, but Emily had just dismantled our entire marriage with one speech, and tomorrow morning I was going to stand back and let her watch it collapse. The evolution began the next morning at 6:30 when my alarm went off, and I did something I'd never done in 7 years of marriage. I got up, made myself a single cup of coffee in my travel mug, grabbed my keys, and headed out the door for work without making Emily's usual cappuccino that she drank while getting ready. It sounds petty when I say it out loud, but that cappuccino had been part of our morning routine since we moved in together, something I did automatically while she showered, timed perfectly, so it was still hot when she came downstairs. That morning she came down in her bathrobe expecting to find it waiting on the counter and instead found nothing. I was already gone. She texted me around 8 asking if everything was okay, and I replied that everything was great. I was just respecting her autonomy by not assuming she needed me to make her coffee, like she couldn't handle basic tasks herself. She sent back a confused emoji, but didn't push it. That was Monday, and by Wednesday the small changes had started to pile up in ways that created friction neither of us acknowledged directly. Our garbage disposal had been making a weird rattling noise for 2 days, the kind of sound that meant something was stuck in the blades, probably a piece of silverware that had slipped down the drain. Normally I would have already fixed it, but when Emily mentioned it, I told her I had complete faith in her ability to troubleshoot mechanical issues and that I didn't want to rob her of the learning opportunity. She stared at me for a long moment, then said she'd look up a YouTube tutorial. 3 days later, the disposal was still rattling because she never got around to watching the video. The dog food situation became an issue on Thursday. We had a 70-pound German Shepherd named Duke who went through a 40-pound bag of kibble every 3 weeks. I always kept the bag in the garage and filled his bowl twice a day because lifting that bag required some muscle, and Emily had that bad back I mentioned. Thursday evening, she went to feed Duke and found his container empty. The new bag was sitting in the trunk of my car where I'd left it after going to the pet store. She asked me to bring it in, and I explained very pleasantly that I was working on not automatically assuming physical tasks were my responsibility, that carrying heavy objects was something any capable adult could manage with proper lifting technique, and that I believed in her strength. Emily's face did this thing where her jaw tightened, but she didn't say anything. She tried to lift the bag herself, struggled for a solid minute, then ended up dragging it across the garage floor and leaving it there. Duke ate half portions for 2 days until I finally brought it inside. Not because she asked, but because I felt bad for the dog. The washing machine incident happened the following week, and this is where things started to shift from annoying to actually problematic. Our washer is one of those high-efficiency front loaders that occasionally gets mold buildup if you don't clean the rubber seal, and it had started to smell like mildew. Emily asked if I could take a look at it, and I reminded her that household maintenance was a shared responsibility and that I trusted her judgment on how to handle it. She got frustrated and said she didn't know anything about washing machine maintenance, and I suggested she could Google it or call a repair person, that I was trying not to be the kind of husband who treated her like she was incapable of problem solving. The machine kept smelling worse, and our clothes started coming out with this sour odor that meant we had to rewash everything. She eventually called a repair guy who charged us $200 to do what I could have done in 15 minutes with some bleach and a rag. Emily didn't speak to me for the rest of that evening. The grocery situation became a weekly nightmare. I had always done the shopping because I left work earlier than Emily and the store was on my way home. Plus, I was better at meal planning and sticking to a budget. Now I only bought food for myself, carefully calculating portions and leaving her to handle her own nutrition. The first week, she didn't realize what was happening until she went to make dinner and discovered we had ingredients for exactly one meal. She asked where everything else was, and I explained that I was practicing not making unilateral decisions about household needs, that buying food for both of us without consultation was presumptuous and controlling. Emily ordered takeout that night, and I could see her mentally calculating how much this new arrangement was going to cost. Our friends started noticing the change at a barbecue we hosted 3 weeks into my evolution. My buddy Jason and his wife brought over their new patio furniture set that they wanted to assemble in our backyard, one of those complicated 8-piece deals with cushions and a table. Jason naturally asked if I could help him carry the boxes from his truck, and I politely declined, saying I was working on not perpetuating stereotypes about men always handling physical labor. Everyone kind of laughed awkwardly, thinking I was joking, until they realized I was serious. Jason and his wife ended up struggling with the boxes themselves while I sat on our deck, drinking a beer. Emily's face turned red, but she couldn't say anything without contradicting her own speech about toxic masculinity. Later that evening, after everyone left, she said I was being deliberately unhelpful, and I asked her very calmly what part of respecting equality and rejecting traditional gender roles she wanted me to stop doing. She didn't have an answer. The car situation is what finally scared her. It was a rainy morning in late June, and Emily's Honda wouldn't start, just made that clicking sound that usually means a dead battery. She called me from the driveway, clearly expecting me to come out and either jump it or figure out the problem. I was in the middle of my morning coffee, and I told her that car trouble was stressful and I had confidence she could handle it, that calling AAA or watching a YouTube video on jumpstarting would be a great growth opportunity. Her voice got sharp, and she said she was going to be late for a client meeting. I reminded her that I was working on not rushing to solve her problems like she was incapable, that this was exactly the kind of protective behavior she'd identified as toxic. She hung up on me. I watched from the kitchen window as she stood in the rain trying to figure out the hood latch, then gave up and called an Uber that